Thank you, everyone. Thank you, councillors, and good evening. My name is Patrick Hall. I'm the Mayor of the City of Canning. It's 6 p.m. on the 11th of April 2023, a Tuesday. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's agenda briefing, and I declare the meeting open. We start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land. We also pay our respects to elders both past and present, and in accordance with City of Canning Policy CM 105, agenda briefings are conducted for the purpose of providing elected members with a forum to ask questions of the City's administration and to receive answers to those questions to enable informed decision-making by Council at the following week's ordinary Council meeting. In accordance with the Local Government Act 1995, agenda briefings are not decision-making forums. Questions may be asked and answered, and there is to be no debate or discussion. Questions must be specifically relevant to the item being discussed. Elected members and employees must disclose any financial proximity or partiality interest they have in an item to be discussed and declare the nature of that interest at the commencement of the briefing or at the latest when the item is about to be discussed. If a member or employee has a financial proximity or partiality interest in a matter arising during discussion, the nature of that interest must be disclosed as soon as possible after the matter is raised. Interests are to be disclosed in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act 1995 as they apply to council meetings. Individuals disclosing an interest other than a partiality interest must not participate in that part of a briefing relating to their interest and must leave the meeting room whilst the item is under discussion. Agenda briefings are public meetings, and any information provided to the meeting by attendees must be publicly accessible. Can I ask everyone here this evening to make sure your mobiles are turned off, particularly councillors? Can I have mobiles off and away, please, or on silent for the duration of the briefing? This briefing is being live streamed via the City's YouTube channel. Tenants at item 2, we have apologies from Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza. Here's an apology for this evening. At item 2.2, approved leave of absence, there is none. At item 3, disclosures of interest. CEO to advise of disclosures. Have you received any disclosures of interest, CEO?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In relation to item 3.1, declarations of financial direct or indirect interest, I have received none. In relation to item 3.2, declarations of interest affecting impartiality, again, I have received none.
Thank you. Item 4, question time for the public. I understand we have no pre-submitted questions from the public. Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question? None. Thank you very much. We will then move on, move across item 4.2 to item 4.3, which is deputations. At item 4.3, deputations there are none this evening. At item 5, items brought forward, there are none. Item 6, reports of committee meetings, there are none this evening. Item 7, reports, the first of which are reports from the Office of the Chief Executive Officer at item 7.1, and there are also none. At item 7.2, the responsible officer being Ms Lorraine Driscoll, the Director of Corporate and Commercial. The first report is CC 007 of 23, the title of the report being Monthly Financial Report, March 2023. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Bain, thank you. The recommendation, by the way, is on page 4 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are a number of entries in the warrant listings to people described as council contributions. What are they?
Sorry, council contributions. Ms Driscoll.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll take those questions on notice and bring those back to you at the next meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The 550,000 of funding for the Kent Street Weir Precinct Plan, are we able to have a breakdown as to what that money has been spent on this financial year? Thank you.
Ms Driscoll, did you want to take that on notice?
Yes, thank you. I'll take that one on notice.
We'll get a question. We'll get a response back to you, Councillor Bain, and the council. Thank you. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We shall move on then to the next item, which is item 7.3. The responsible officer is Mr Graham Bride, the Director of Planning and Development. The item is CD 004 of 23, and the title of that report is the Initiation of Scheme Amendment number 13 to Local Planning Scheme number 42, Additional Use in brackets, Medical Centre, close brackets, 23 Mill Street, in brackets, Lot 8, close brackets, Cannington. The officer's recommendation is on page 40 of the agenda and is also on screen. Any questions in relation to that scheme amendment? Thank you, councillors. We shall move on then to item CD005. The title of this report being Metropolitan Region Scheme Amendment and Land Exchange to support the Canning Vale Sporting Complex. The officer's recommendation is on page 50 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. I have a question from Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With paragraph 53, it says that there will be costs involved in external consultants to provide technical reports, but it doesn't say how much. Do we have an estimate of what these costs could be?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, so paragraph 53 relates to the expenditure that's already occurred to date, so in preparation of the MRS amendment. So all those technical documents from engineers, environmental consultants have already been spent in relation to preparing the MRS. There is some further work that will be needed to look at the servicing costs in a bit more detail, and that'll feed into the business case, which will come to council in a couple of months.
Councillor Spencer-Teo?
Do those further reports have a cost associated, or is that internal?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, so we have got funding for this project from the state government. So as part of its allocation, we're allowed to utilise the money for the MRS amendment, all the technical reports. The servicing cost report, which is actually underway through Porters, would be a cost that would be allocated to the project. So no direct cost to the city would come out of the budget relating to the Canning Vale Regional Sports Complex.
I understand that that's being paid for by the state government, that $10 million, but how much of that would be going to those technical reports, roughly?
Director Bride, is that something you'd like to take on notice?
Yeah, I'll get the exact figure and report back to council.
Thank you.
Thanks. Second question is,
Well, that's your fourth question. I think
well,
technically your fourth question, but yes, go ahead.
would there be much of an issue if we deferred this decision until we received the business case? Given that we're already 8 years away from the original decision for this, what's another 7 months going to impact this project?
Director Bride, is that a question you're able to answer?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. Yeah, as pointed out in the report, there is a long lead time for this process. It has to go to the WAPC to decide whether to initiate the scheme amendment. So, it's probably about a 3-year process. If it is deferred a couple of months, it just means the gazettal of the amendment on the way through is going to take an extra few months at the back end. So I guess the reason for bringing it to council was that there is a very long lead time. We are committing to bring the business case to council as per recommendation 7 of this report. So council will see that in a lot more detail at a SIB coming up, but certainly council can defer the MRS amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
One more. With paragraph 62, it states that it doesn't commit council to proceed with the sporting complex and that a SIB would be presented no later than November 2023. Does this mean that this is pending a further decision from council? If so, why is that not reflected in point 7?
Director Bride.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. So there will be, as I said, a business case that will come to council via a SIB, and post that SIB there will be a presentation to council through a report in relation to that business case. So there will be a consequential further report to council. So we can certainly tidy that up as part of that recommendation 7. We can do that between now and next week.
Thank you, Director.
The reason why I ask these questions is I have a concern, and please feel free to mitigate those concerns. As we've been down here before with Gibbs Street, the Jandakot Eastern Link Road and the Southern Link Road, and many more, where council has for years received reports and recommendations asserting that we have to support an officer recommendation due to how far the project has progressed. Is this going to be another case because we've already received the funding and all of that? Which brings me back to my original question, is 7 months really that much of an issue here, waiting for the business case? Wouldn't not be better off waiting for that business case rather than spending these funds if the business case doesn't stack up?
CEO, did you want to respond to that? Director Bright, I'll come back to you in just a moment. CEO?
Yeah, look, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, only to say that, the decision to proceed with Canning Vale Regional Sporting Complex is absolutely a decision for council. Bear in mind, $10 million is certainly short even at a stage 1 level. So the city is actively pursuing federal government funding and also some additional state government money to ensure that that project proceeds. The idea of the business case is to give a greater quantum of what stage 1 looks like. So certainly we've done some work, or had done some work, but I would accept that council needs complete visibility over what stage 1 would actually look like and cost before it looked to proceed. This item really relates to the land assembly. I think it doesn't necessarily change the quantum of land that the city owns. It's really just establishing a better parcel of land that can be used for this purpose going forward. So I think the decision that's in front of council at the moment is, does it agree with the land assembly and the structure of the land parcels? Does that make sense going forward? If it does, then I would argue that the decision to proceed with the MRS amendment makes sense, regardless of the decision that is still yet to come on the Canning Vale Sporting Complex.
Director Bright, have you anything you'd like to add to that?
No, Mr Mayor, except to say that, the purpose of this amendment is really just to set a logical zoning and to take the land swap process a little bit further. So, as I said, it doesn't commit council. There'll be a lot of work in relation to the business case and what the ultimate layout for stage 1 may or may not be.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on? Councillor Jacobs, yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. 2 questions. One, if this was not agreed, would this effectively derail the Canning Vale sports complex at least as we know it?
Director Bright?
Through Mr Mayor, so if council didn't wish to rezone the land or didn't wish to request the state government start the process of rezoning the land, then the land or the complex in relation to the zoning that applies couldn't proceed. So it's a different story to defer, but if a council was to not wish to progress the proposal, then we wouldn't have a zoning in place that would support the complex.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you. Second one, Mr Mayor. So I believe this is probably a formality. Do you know of any issues where you've gone to the state government and they said, actually, good idea, but we think we want to build another, hypothetically speaking, we want to put Speedway there? My understanding is it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. We just have to, is a bit of a formality with a bit of a time lead up. Is that right?
I don't think just to be fair, I don't think the director can answer a hypothetical, but Director, are you able to answer that in some way?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. We have worked reasonably closely with the Department of Planning and other agencies such as DWER. So this is something that they've guided the city on in terms of what they would expect to see within an MRS amendment. So we've definitely we're confident that if council did proceed to support it, the state would support the MRS amendment as it stands.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Sabiri, thank you.
Thank you. My question's about, I guess it's just more technical, to better understand the report. Paragraph 14 refers to rezoning of public purpose and water catchment. What does that mean, and what's the difference between what's currently there and parks and recreation?
Director Bright.
Through Mr Mayor. The zoning under the MRS over lot 166 is public purpose, but it also has a designation as a water catchment, so it's a layer on top of that land holding. The rezoning to parks and recreation will ensure that there are no sensitive land uses that would be proposed that would negatively impact the groundwater. So having the land go to parks and recreation provides a certain amount of surety to DWER that they can amend the priority 1 and priority 2 water catchment areas, because that zoning doesn't allow for sensitive land uses to occur. It gives them some confidence they could proceed to amend the priority 1 and priority 2 water catchment area.
Councillor Sabiri.
Yep. So I guess just to follow up to better understand that. So how would, so again, That's part of paragraph 28, which I guess was part of your response as well. It talks about reconfiguration of the water catchment. So, and sort of what you just touched on. How would you reconfigure the water catchment? How does DWARE reconfigure the water catchment? Is it just...
Director Bride.
So post this MRS amendment process, the city would have to liaise with DWARE formally to request an amendment to their water catchment area, priority 1 and priority 2. So it'd be a case of the city writing to DWARE. Once the MRS amendment goes through, they've got confidence of the zoning, so they know that council's proceeded with the zoning to, I guess, take away the ability for a number of land uses to go in there. And then they would have to gazette any amendments to the priority 1, priority 2 areas through Parliament. So there's a process that DWARE would start, but certainly all the discussions pre-lodgement, and it's been encapsulated in the report, that DWARE is very positive and very happy to amend the priority 1 water catchment area, bring it away from the Canning Vale Regional Sports Complex based on the MRS amendment, which reduces potential land use conflict.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If council wasn't to support the Jandakot Eastern Link Road, would that be a significant, I guess, hammer blow to the Canning Vale Sporting Complex and the progression of that project?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, certainly the traffic information that's been prepared as part of the MRS talks about the access from Jandakot Eastern Link Road, but as mentioned to councillors at the SIB and on site, if the Jandakot Eastern Link Road didn't proceed, you could still access the site via the southern local road network, so Johnson Road, Acourt Road and Clifton Road as an alternative. Certainly Jandakot Eastern Link Road in terms of travel times, if a city resident lives in Willerton, for example, you're potentially adding around 8 or 10 minutes to the trip by not having the Jandakot Eastern Link Road, given they're coming from that direction.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We shall move on, if there's no further questions, to the following report, CD 006 of 23, the report being Stage 2 of Jandakot Eastern Link Road, progress to detailed design phase. The officer's recommendation is on page 66 and also appears on screen. Are there any questions in relation to that one? Any questions? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll have a few. In relation to point 15, where we had written to both the City of Cockburn and Jandakot Airport Holdings, was there any response to those letters?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, I might ask Manager Troy Bosic to answer that question, please.
Mr Bosic, can I ask you to come forward, please? Thank you.
Yes, through the Mayor. Yes, look, we got a response from City of Cockburn and it was news to them, so we were going to set up a meeting to discuss it with them, but we haven't taken it any further and we haven't heard back from Jandakot Airport. I spoke to John Fraser from Jandakot Airport. He's aware he's got the letter and he expects a meeting at some stage should we proceed with the project.
Councillor Spencer-Teo.
So just following on from that, there's been no discussion about getting them to commit additional funding, considering the road is now costing a lot more than what originally was
Yep,
planned?
through the Mayor. No, that's correct. We haven't made contact with them since the original letter went out.
Okay.
Councillor, continue.
Thank you. As per paragraph 26, can you please confirm that the City of Canning doesn't need to contribute to boundary projects if it chooses not to, as was the case with when Cockburn sought to widen Farrington Road, Melville said no?
Mr Bosic.
Yep.
Is that the case? They're not bound to contribute?
Through the Mayor, of all the projects where the city has approached a boundary council or where a boundary council has approached the city, all my time that I've been at Canning, we've always gone 50-50 with them, with the adjacent council.
But that's been by our choice. We haven't been compelled to do that. Is that correct?
There's nothing that compels them to do that. That's obviously a situation that's occurred, but Mr Bosic, is that
Yep.
right? There's nothing compels them to
Yes.
contribute?
Through the Mayor, I understand there was something in the Local Government Act that required councils to go 50-50, but I think if two councils disagree, I think it's a decision of the minister, or they try and get councils to talk about it with one another. But otherwise, there is an avenue. I could find that out and mostly put something in the report about that.
Would you please? That'd be interesting and important to council. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you. The land under discussion here is directly referenced in the City of Canning's local biodiversity strategy, a strategy which was created and endorsed in 2018. In the strategy, this very land has a priority area for conservation and a priority action, yet the responsible officer has only referenced the strategy in the comment section. Can you explain why this is the case?
Mr. Bride.
Yes, through Mr Mayor. We've certainly tried to list the relevant sections of the local biodiversity strategy that relates to the Jandakot Eastern Link Road. If there are, as you can see through the comments section, there's several references to a number of aspects that relate to the local biodiversity strategy. But if you believe there is additional information that we should include, then I'm happy to receive it. We can have a look at that.
Okay, following on from that, the biodiversity strategy outlines that with less than 10% of the pre-European extent of the native vegetation contained in the City of Canning, that this Bush Forever 388 site has been identified. Its identified course of action was to seek an amendment to the MRS to Parks and Recreation and LPS 42 to environmental consideration. Why was this never acted upon?
Director Bride, is that the case?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll have to check whether the current designation shows it as conservation or Parks and Recreation and get back to councillors.
Take that on notice, Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you. This one's probably for Executive Manager Johnson, but the local biodiversity strategy has 5 clear objectives. Does the City of Canning administration still commit to these 5 objectives?
I think that would be a yes, Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, at this stage, and we are doing, we have just begun a major review of the strategy to bring it back to council, hopefully this calendar year.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thanks. Under the sustainability considerations, paragraph 77, the only consideration identified in CM 194 is commitment 6. Can you please confirm that the responsible officer is saying that commitments 3, 4 and 5 of CM 194 are not relevant? And if so, is this because they may support arguments against this road?
Probably disregard the last part of that question, but just in relation to the first part of it, Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, we felt that commitment 6 was the most relevant clause in that particular policy because it talks about social sustainability and a thriving economy, which is all the aspects of Jandakot Eastern Link Road. But yeah, we can have a look at commitments 3 and 4 and look at that for next week.
And Councillor, I understand the reason for the question. I understand the question. I just think it's inappropriate to make a comment that the directors intentionally may have left that out for the reason outlined by you, and that's the reason why I asked for that second part of that question to be struck. Anything further?
Yeah, just a couple more. With respect to paragraph 48 and the reference to the environmental offsets, can you please clarify the following? My understanding is that the environmental offsets for Metronet's Thornley-Coburn link are covered in 2 sites, being Mardella and Keybrook, both of which are pre-existing vegetation and represent a net loss. The Harrisdale Swamp revegetation site was identified and funded through the Banksia Woodland Restoration Project in 2017, which exists due to the clearing of the original 167 hectares of Banksia woodland by Jandakot Airport Holdings. Jandakot provided $9.2 million to restore the Banksia woodlands within 45 kilometres of Jandakot Airport. So how is Harrisdale Swamp being classified as a Jandakot Eastern Link Road offset when it's already identified to be environmentally offset for the previous 167 hectares?
Director Bride, is there something you might need to take on notice?
I might see if take on notice, Mr Mayor.
We'll take that question on notice.
Thank you. And finally, The city's urban forest strategy identifies the suburb of Canning Vale as one of the lowest rating suburbs in the city of Canning with respect to the level of tree canopy cover, yet the strategy isn't even referenced in this report. The urban forest strategy highlights how critical it is to retain what we have, and why has this not been considered as part of the report?
Director Bright, was that a consideration for the report?
Through Mr Mayor, no, we certainly did talk about the proposed revegetation area, the 65 hectares that could occur on the adjacent site. If there are any aspects of the urban forest strategy that we need to at least cover off, then we can take that offline, and I can chat to Acting Director Johnson.
Acting Director Johnson.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Also to note, the urban forest strategy identifies canopy as anything over or above 3 metres, so the predominant vegetation type in the area is over 3 metres. Is under 3 metres.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Any further questions on CD 006 of 23? Councillor Jacobs.
Page 89, main roads WA, total $5,332,000, with a contribution of Canning 2.26666, together 79980. If the city was not to choose to go ahead with this project, what would happen to the main road WA funding? Would it be taken and perhaps given to other councillors and prioritised their roads against the ratepayers of the City of Canning?
Director, what generally would happen with those funds if they're returned to main roads?
Through Mr Mayor, we'd have to return the 5.32 million back to main roads. And given we haven't got anything ready but that could come forward that would meet main roads requirements, we would essentially, there'd be a loss in terms of the ongoing main roads grant improvement program.
Thank you. Anything further? Councillor Sweeney, and then I'll go to Councillor Hardeep Singh. Councillor Sweeney.
Yes, thank you. I only have one question.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, how will this construction affect the kangaroo population, if at all?
Acting Director Johnson might be more appropriate for you to answer that.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we are aiming to translocate the majority of kangaroos before the project starts, so we are hopeful that it doesn't impact the overall population when the actual project commences.
Thank you.
Not really answered my question there, Director. I'm just wondering how will it? Is really more.
I think I did answer your question. He's saying that the project won't commence until they've been translocated.
So they're going to be translocated. All of them, the mob of kangaroos is going to be translocated.
I think that's the point. Is that they're going to be translocated. The fund has already been released by council to do that, and that will occur before the construction commences. That's the aim.
Because it would have affected this population with this road going through. That's why we're moving them. Is that correct?
Well, it would have, but the road won't go through until the translocation's occurred. Mr Johnson?
Through you, Mr Mayor, there's an unsustainable population as it stands now, so we need to deal with the population right now. So regardless of whether a road goes through or any other project, we need to deal with the overpopulation.
Okay, so through you, Mr Mayor, so what you're saying there is that the construction will have no effect on this population, and we're moving the translocation of these kangaroos is because at their current location at the moment, it's unsustainable. Correct?
Mr Johnson?
Through you, Mr Mayor, correct. Exactly right, Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you. Councillor Hardeep Singh?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is regarding page 78, about the table which explains the cost to the city with and without Jendagoat Eastern Link Road. So if we go ahead with the project, the cost to the city is $1.5 million approximately. And if we don't go ahead, there are two options explained here, a roundabout and a cul-de-sac. Now, roundabout is specifically for the Canning Vale Sports Complex. So I believe until the Canning Vale Sports Complex is built, we are not spending that money of $462,500 So my first question is, approximately, if everything goes ahead well, in how many years are we expecting to spend these $462,000? That's my first question.
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, so yes, you're right, that roundabout for Canning Vale Regional Sports Complex would only be needed in the event that Jandakot Eastern Link Road was not supported, and it would tie into the first stage of the Canning Vale Regional Sports Complex. So depending on when and if Council supports that project, it'll be a deliverable as part of that first stage.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Just follow up, Director, just to understand, let's assume, it's an assumption that Canning Vale Sports Complex first stage approved by Council this year. How long before this money needs to be spent?
Director.
I think as a ballpark, you'd say a couple of years.
Thank you. And my second question is about the new access to waste transfer station. I'm going to the second option, which lists $942,400. The report says it's likely within next 5 years we will need to build this access. I'm struggling to find how likely. Can someone provide me more explanation, like percentage figure, 60%, 90%, 20%? How do you explain likely?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, I might ask Mr Bosic to answer that one.
Mr Bosic. Likelihood?
Yes, through the Mayor, well, it really depends on what happens at the waste transfer station. So we had Warren Bowe, Director Bowe and myself met with them to try and construct access better than what we're going to get as part of the Ranford Station project. So at the moment, both our waste transfer station and the park and ride are going to be using the same access off of Jandakot Eastern Link Road. So once that becomes busier, once the waste transfer station becomes busier, there may be a need to separate the trucks and the cars. So we don't know when, but it could be something, depending on what happens at the waste transfer station, as 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Bosic. Councillor Singh.
Last question, Mr Mayor. Given that there are uncertainties about these alternative projects, if we don't support Jandakot Eastern Link Road, is there a possibility to just delay the whole Jandakot Eastern Link Road? I understand we have to return the main roads funding, but how likely are we to get it back in 2 years' time when we are ready to go ahead with it?
I'll just ask the CEO to address that. CEO Michael Littleton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. There's probably a range of hypotheticals, Councillor Singh, but we tried to cover off on the timing as best we could at the SIBs, at the number of SIBs in relation to this matter. We certainly spoke about the access to the waste transfer station, the opportunity to try and expand that site as a strategic waste centre servicing the southern precinct. We will develop a business case and bring that forward for council. We also spoke about the opportunity to try and release the opportunity to use that land for more revenue generating projects going forward as well. So all of those things are opportunities that we spoke about. The potential for some of these projects is in the immediate term or in the short term, not in the longer term. Regardless, I suppose to answer your question, the issue of delaying the project at the moment is really about accessing and utilising the state government funding, main roads funding. So if we are not proceeding, we must hand the money back. That will mean that if we choose to do the project in a year's time or 2 years' time, we will need to seek that funding from main roads through the road improvement grant scheme, and there's no guarantees that we'll get that in that period of time. So if you want to deliver the projects, if you want to look to move these projects forward, and you might recall we spoke about the waste opportunity, the commercial opportunities with the industrial land in the broader context, as well as Canning Vale Regional Sporting Complex and those other projects that are more known, then we will move forward. If we wish to delay and defer, then we will hand the money back.
Thank you. Councillor Sabiri, yes.
Just when follow up with Councillor Singh's question about the roundabout, which option would that fall under? Would that be option 1, 2, or option 3, or it's that just separate?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, if we're talking about the roundabout which services the future Canning Vale Regional Sports Complex, that's required if the Jandakot Eastern Link Road doesn't proceed. So that's the roundabout that we'd have to build to accommodate access from the southern direction rather than the northern direction.
Councillor Sabiri.
Just wondering what potential environmental impacts that would have. Would that cause more fragmentation compared to the other options, or?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, it's got quite a localised impact. It's a small amount of widening at that intersection, so very limited to nil environmental impact on that access to accommodate the roundabout.
Councillors, are you happy with that? Thank you. Anything further, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Sweeney.
Yes, thank you. Just a message, a question for the CEO that I'm interested. Just in terms of priority, how would you rate these three projects at the moment? The Canning Vale Sports Complex, the waste transfer, or the industrial project, for example, the intermodal? How would you rate them 1, 2, 3?
CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the intermodal is not a matter currently under consideration. It's not a priority for the city. It is a state government project that has broader logistics opportunities. So it's well, I mean, I'm not quite sure where that would sit from my point of view. The opportunities around that precinct, both with Canning Vale and with the industrial area, I think are high priorities for the city. We have spoken about revenue diversification opportunities and trying to offset service delivery with funding other than rate revenue. So I think that the opportunities around the industrial precinct ticks those boxes, and I think are certainly things that I've heard this council ask me to pursue and look at. So I would argue that that's a priority, as well as the Canning Vale Sporting Complex. We spoke at the CIS, the Community Infrastructure Strategy, and the opportunities to try and provide greenfield playing fields that are needed in the Canning Vale area. So the Canning Vale Sporting Complex ticks those boxes. I would acknowledge that there is a lack of funding at this point in time, and whilst we are advocating strongly to get those funds from state and federal government, it is still a project that is yet unfunded, but is certainly on our runway and is in our advocacy. So we are spending an awful lot of time trying to bring those projects to fruition. So I would argue that both of those projects are an opportunity for the city, and I'm very confident that they will, if able to be delivered, that they will set the city in good stead to service its future community.
Anything further before we move on? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Just further to that, can I confirm that the city has changed its position from the desire of this land to be rezoned to environmental consideration to now this being a revenue generating land holding?
CEO, just briefly.
Look, I think the land, there are a range of land parcels in this precinct that we are looking to develop and utilise. The old landfill site is industrial land, and there is an opportunity to utilise that land for that purpose. There is, as part of this precinct, the current proposal is that there will be 65 hectares of environmental open space that will be protected and preserved for use and for rehabilitation. There is also a parcel of land on the eastern side of the proposed Jandakot Eastern Link Road that will be retained forever as bush forever. So I think that this project and all of the things that we're looking to do both preserves the environmental elements over this precinct, as well as explores the commercial and industrial opportunities for the city as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one final one. Is this what has triggered the review of the local biodiversity strategy, or is it for other reasons?
Mr Johnson.
Through you, Mr Mayor. No, it's best practice to review our strategies, and we aim to do a review every 2 years. We haven't done that, so we're trying to readdress previous work that should have occurred.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for the questions. We'll move to item 7.4. The responsible officer this evening being Mr Dion Johnson. Beside me, the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Environment. It's EN 005 of 23. The report title is 18/2022 Panel of Pre-Qualified Suppliers for Fertilisers, Pesticides, Wetting Agents and Seeds. The recommendation is on page 98 of the agenda and also is on screen. Any questions in relation to that panel of pre-qualified suppliers? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to paragraph 2. It mentions that the contractor will be required to supply and deliver fertilisers and pesticide products listed in the price schedule. Are we able to have a copy of that price schedule?
Mr Johnson?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we can provide the schedule, no problems.
Consider it done. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Oh, Councillor Bain, yes.
And one more, thank you, Mr Mayor. Does the tender also include the supply of herbicides?
Mr Johnson.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Herbicide is a subset of pesticides, so you have insecticides, rodenticides, they all come under the umbrella of pesticides.
All sides.
So one would expect that glyphosate will be on the price schedule, is that correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, correct.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to EN 006 of 23, the report title being Supply Contract for Disposal of General Waste. The recommendation is on page 110 of tonight's agenda and is also, yes it is, on screen. Thank you, Governance. Any questions on that item? Councillor Sabiri?
So I guess this has come out because the Kwinana Waste to Energy project hasn't been finalised. So we have to keep finding different tenders because of that. So where does that stand? What's happening with that? Are we going to have any kind of concessions as a result of them? I guess concessions or any kind of, they've keep delaying it, and we have to find other project tenders, other places to take our rubbish, our waste. So like, what is this contract?
The agreement we have expires in, you're right, the agreement we have expires in June of this year, and we have a 6 month with 3 extensions of further 6 months with an area in Hazelmere. Seems to be a very good deal, but the CEO will answer your question. CEO Michael Littleton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The waste to energy facility is not have sought an extension. I'm happy to speak confidentially about when they have sought an extension to the practical completion date. So when they can start, when they are commissioned and due to take our rubbish. So effectively we are required to continue to landfill until such time as the waste to energy provider is able to accept our waste. We are currently in negotiations with that contractor, with the waste to energy contractor, about what provisions and concessions that they will provide us. Part of the current contract is that they will meet any additional costs that the city bears, being the difference between their gate fee and the current gate fee for landfill. So we will not be disadvantaged by that contract or that service provider not being able to accept our waste.
Councillor Sabiri raises a relevant question, just based on your response. Can we provide a confidential SIP rep to council? We'll provide a situation report to council under confidential cover, just cover off on the latest on that item. Thank you, CEO. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, none. We will then move on to item 7.5, the Directorate of the Director Customer and Community, Dr. Sarah McQuaid. There are no reports from that Directorate this evening. The final one being notices of motion for consideration at the next ordinary council meeting. We do have one notice of motion 003 of 23, the title being International Red Cross Oblique Crescent Donation for Earthquake Relief in Turkey and Syria. The recommendation is page 115 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. It's the final matter for this evening's meeting. Any questions on that matter? None. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to urgent business then. At item 8, there is no urgent business this evening. Item 10, confidential matters. There are no matters requiring confidentiality and closure being there. No further business this evening. I declare the agenda briefing closed. The time now is 6:45 p.m. Thank you for those online. Thank you for our guests in the audience, and thank you, councillors, for your attendance, and good night.